and welcome to our presentation, Connecting Instructors with Resources, the Trials and Triumphs of Creating an Instructor Resources Site. We wanted to start by providing a brief overview of our goals for the presentation. We plan to describe our efforts to create one centralized location where instructors can find library-created learning resources. As we do so, we will highlight some of the key questions that we considered as part of the process, and we will also provide recommendations to those who may be interested in undertaking a similar project. We'll take just a second to introduce ourselves. My name is Jane Hammons, and I am an assistant professor and the Teaching and Learning Engagement Librarian in the Teaching and Learning Department at the Ohio State University Libraries. And now I will pass it over to Allison.
Hi, my name is Allison Devito, and I am the Office of Distance Education and E-Learning Library Services Liaison.
Hi, I'm Hanna Primeau, and I'm the instructional designer for Ohio State University Libraries.
And I'm Amanda Larson, the Affordable Learning Instructional Consultant, also for University Libraries.
We are all part of or connected to the library's teaching and learning department. In this department, one of our primary goals is instructor development, working with instructors, including those within the libraries who teach, as well as instructors outside of the libraries, to integrate information literacy and affordable learning resources into their courses. As part of this, we also provide the development, also support the development of learning resources, and we provide some information literacy instruction directly to students through credit courses as well as co-curricular instruction. It is important to note here, however, that while the Teaching and Learning Department does have these goals of instructor development and supporting students' information literacy, the Teaching and Learning Department does not act as the information literacy program or does not coordinate the information literacy program. There are many individuals in the Ohio State University Libraries who are involved in information literacy instruction or create instructional resources, but there's not a coordinated information literacy program as there is at other institutions. And we provide this context as a way of explaining why we wanted to do this project, but also some of the challenges that we had along the way. To provide some additional context when thinking about the scale and timeline for this project, which you're going to see in just a minute, there are a few additional things that we wanted to highlight, and you'll hear more about some of these later on. But first, we think it's important to note that this was not a project that was mandated from above. We were not told that we needed to create an instructor resources site, and we were not given a deadline to do so. So it's a project that developed a little bit more organically. For none of us that are involved in this project was this our main responsibility. It's connected to all of our jobs, but we all had many additional responsibilities at the same time that we were working on this project. A few other factors that impacted the course of this project. The university as a whole has been undergoing a transition from Box to OneDrive and Teams, which impacted how we did our work and what types of resources we had available to us. There was also at the university the creation of an online teaching and learning resource center for the entire campus. And the creation of that site encouraged us to think more about what the specific purpose of our library focused site would be in comparison to that broader site. In addition, of course, all of this, not all of this, but the majority of this work was taking place during COVID. And this caused significant disruptions in where we were working, how we were working, the types of jobs that some of us were doing. And so I say all of this to provide context for the next slide, which outlines the timeline for the project.
So we wanted to map out what the project has looked like over the last 2 years, both for this presentation and our own reflection. As you can see, we took on this project beginning in the autumn semester of 2019. I don't think any of us realized the project that we were embarking on at the time, but these steps have been important to our progress. And like Jane mentioned, none of this was the primary focus for anyone on the team, so that also contributes to the length. I'm not going to read each box. Everyone will have access to this presentation when we're done, but the timeline categorizes our triumphs and tribulations over the last couple of semesters and provides context for our progress and outcomes.
In this section, we will describe the initial step that we took as part of this project, which was the creation of our digital objects inventory. As mentioned, there are many folks in the libraries who are creating instructional resources, and our initial goal was really to create a master list of the resources that had been created. Some of the questions that we used to guide our work in this part of the project were, what instructional resources already existed? What type of resources were they? What formats? For what purposes were those resources being used? We wanted to know who was creating resources. We wanted to know the status of those resources. Were they up to date? We wanted to know whether or not we had redundant resources, so duplicates of things in different areas. And all of this was important in allowing us to think about what resources might be needed going forward. We took several paths to try to identify existing digital resources, reviewed shared box folders that we had for the teaching and learning department where lots of different types of materials had been stored. We explored LibGuides that had been created by subject librarians or others in the libraries to identify the types of resources they had on their site and who created those resources. We also tried to do a survey of librarians and staff to get an idea of what types of resources that they were creating. As we were going through this process for each of the resources, there were a few things that we were trying to identify, things such as the topic, the creator, where it was stored, who the intended audience was, what the licensing was, and several other categories. We collected all of this information, and the end result was a large spreadsheet, and you can see on the screen just a portion of that spreadsheet, and you can see some of the types of categories that we had. So file name, location, we tried to provide a link to the file if we could find one, who the creator was, what the topic was, and there were several other categories that we have as well. And we will provide a link at the end of this presentation where you can access a blank version of this template if you're interested in using something like this for yourself. As we were going through this whole process of identifying the digital objects that already existed, there were a lot of challenges. For many of the resources, it was unclear who the actual creator was. Or even if we could identify who the creator was, that person may no longer have been at the university libraries. It was often unclear which resources were actually being used. There might be files stuck in a folder somewhere, but we didn't know if anyone actually was using them for a course, for example, or anything else. We didn't really get a great response to our survey, so we were left really trying to figure out a lot on our own. And when we did find resources, we often noticed that in a lot of cases, they were outdated, sometimes very outdated, even some that were still being used. So it was at this point that we had felt that we had gone as far as we could with identifying existing resources that we started to make this transition into thinking about creating this site where we could share resources.
While we were planning this site, we had a lot of considerations. We wanted to create a site with just-in-time resources for teaching, research, and information literacy skills. We had to decide what that site would look like and what materials we would share. Like Jane mentioned earlier, this site was not mandated from above, so we had a little bit of autonomy to think about what we wanted to do with this site. But we also realized that we would need buy-in from a key group of stakeholders for resources and support. Our head of teaching and learning was quickly on board and helped us consider how to coordinate with the library leadership, marketing, communications, the IT team, and subject librarians. Another consideration was we needed to be really specific about our audience. We have another team in the teaching and learning department that focuses on student resources and student success. So for this site, we really wanted to target instructors. There were also considerations about technology and what platform would be available and supported. We obviously had to work within the confines of a university-supported platform and consider the learning curve and the amount of control we would have. We also needed to sharply define what the site would collect and what would be outside the scope of the website. We decided we wanted this to be just-in-time and ready-made resources and not necessarily a deep dive into the scholarship of information literacy or teaching and learning. So we created pathways to link to these resources for a broader overview and focus the site on resources instructors could readily use to teach these topics. We also wanted to see how other institutions handled this, and we spent a lot of time simultaneously with the digital objects inventory to look at other universities and their websites to see what the scope of their resources were, their platforms, how they share these resources, whether it was downloads or links, and all of those considerations.
When we were looking at the types of resources that already existed, we started asking questions about who were these created for. And if we wanted to make this instructor-focused resources, do we want to let students find out what they needed on their own? How will we have the most impact sharing this resources? And how will this help make the workload of subject librarians lighter and more hands-off on teaching resources and information literacy skills? So this resulted us in, as mentioned earlier, focusing on external teaching faculty and staff as well that were external to libraries. We knew that these resources would be helpful in instances that an instructor comes to a subject librarian for assistance, but we expect that use case to be smaller than direct use due to the role of teaching and learning department has within the library institution. Teaching and learning department is perfectly poised with regular workshops hosted by us and cameos and workshops done by other offices, such as the Office of Distance Education and e-learning, that allow us not only to familiarize teachers with information literacy topics, but also resources that will allow them to integrate concepts that result in more successful research-based assignments. The statement you see here was really integral moving forward.
In addition to being a place for just-in-time instruction, we also identified that the library didn't have a great place to offer an introduction to open educational resources to instructors. But with the addition of my position to the department, there was now somebody in a position who could curate and create those resources. And since those resources are meant for instructors, it made sense to include them in this section on the site.
As mentioned earlier, we began this process as a larger group that included our department head, exploring and bringing websites to the table that we thought did it well. And from there, we were able to formulate what would be important features to add what seemed like too much, and how to ensure that anything we created would be dynamic enough to translate to mobile devices as well, seeing that we are an iPad school. On the left, you can see the sort of example that we were bringing to the table. We had two people in the core group, it was both me and Amanda, that had worked on web design before and knew how to approach building a wireframe for the site, something that would be vital for when we planned on pitching this idea to our application and development team, to our communications team, that we hoped would allow the people that would be building this to build it with ease. We were looking to make sure to show we had more than a vague idea of what we wanted this to be, and we hoped that it would work in our favor in acquiring the resources we needed and both the people power as well as the digital power to do this. And you can see this process is messy. This was just me on OneNote with my pen scribbling out ideas to see what might actually work. And so sometimes just good old paper and pen is really useful in creating this sort of sitemap. So it was finally time to approach both communications and application developments and operations. Communications were overrun with all the new changes that was happening with COVID at the time. There was constant changes week by week for what was happening internally to the libraries. And so we moved on to our communications with applications and development. And they firmly stated that they would not be building this, but they would give us the resources. They suggested perhaps we should make it a LibGuide. And this perhaps should have been our first clue that despite showing examples of having a sitemap and a pretty firm plan, only we really knew how big of a project this was intending to be and what sort of traffic we intended for it to receive. Along with the suggestion of using a LibGuides instead, we were also suggested to have maybe a sortable but not really searchable database that held all our items, something that looked akin to an Excel sheet embedded into a web page. We had firm ideas about how accessible and how user-friendly this site needed to be. And so the final option they offered us was the only option that worked for us, which was a WordPress site. WordPress wasn't personally what I was hoping for, and particularly not one that was locked down in capabilities, which is what our institution has. But Making it from scratch really wasn't either, particularly with a group of people whose 4 main job roles were not this. But we were determined to make this happen. Ever optimistic, I spent a couple of weeks playing around with the site solo, trying to find the best way to easily sort new materials and make a blogging site not look like a blogging site. I wanted to make sure we could drill down on topics so as not to overwhelm what we predicted may be an already overwhelmed user. And I was able to mock up a prototype to show the group. And it was from there we were able to start building. The biggest and most integral part of this whole process was figuring out how to make sorting the resources incredibly easy when we had quite a few categories and subcategories. Why did we do categories instead of tagging? Categories allowed for pages to be nested easier than tags. And by that, I mean a main topic heading of locating library resources. And within that, finding books, finding databases, finding e-materials. When we used tagging, you could accidentally end up with 3 tags for information literacy, all varying due to spelling and capitalization changes. And categories allowed us to avoid that. So we were able to easily nest pages, avoid duplicate pages, and because this was technically a blogging site, we were able to mark these pages accordingly so that a single new object could be added via the blogging interface with no real background knowledge of how the entire site was designed. We didn't want to lose anything to institutional knowledge, and this allowed people to easily add resources.
We built the categories out from a user's perspective and created icons that match to go on the homepage. For example, in this image, both locating library resources and locating affordable curricular resources are top-level categories. Then once a user clicks into the main category they are interested in, they can then select from a set of icons that feature the subcategories. A neat, if unexpected, feature that we were able to build in was a drop-down menu that appeared at the top of each page that allows for the user to quickly navigate out to the front page to explore other resources. It's worth noting that what technology you have available through your institution. Based on the options at Ohio State, we chose to build out our icons in Adobe Spark. It was easy to use to complete the task and allowed our team to easily utilize the approved colors within our institution's brand guidelines page because we were able to type in the exact color codes into Spark. In these images, you see 2 sets of icons, one from the Collaborating with Libraries submenu and one from the Locating Library Resources for you and your students, and both are designed with the colors from the Ohio State brand guidelines color page. Accessibility was also really important to us as we designed the site. So we made sure that all of our icons that we included alternative text or alt text, as well as their title and the file URL. The images on this slide show what this looked like inside of WordPress. The image on the left shows the graphic, and then the image on the right shows the fields that are available to you in WordPress, including the alt text field, which is highlighted here.
Beyond the ease of filing resources through categories on the website, we created a post template, knowing that it would probably just be a small, intimate group of people adding to it at top 4, but we wanted to ensure that there was a level of cohesiveness that was necessary to ensure that the website looked consistent, particularly over time as we added resources. Again, that institutional knowledge of how things were done wouldn't get lost in the process. And this was really intended to make the back end as easy to use as the front end for adding and removing resources, as well as finding resources.
As a design decision, we made sure that the videos we selected were embedded on the page and that any textual information was brief, just enough to get folks a sense of what the resource was, and hiding the rest behind a cut, which allows users to click to see more if they decide it's useful. This leads to a nice balance between not having super cluttered pages, but also giving enough information for someone to quickly and easily browse to find the resources that they might need. The image on this slide shows both how those embedded videos and textual components display on the page. This project faced a lot of different challenges throughout the process, which led to us pivoting and going down a different path after this first iteration of the site was built. The original tool we were given, in this case WordPress, was set up for us but we were limited to working within the parameters of what is essentially the blog setup. We could create pages that hosted blog content, and then we could use the blog features of WordPress to create those posts on those pages. It's not completely unworkable, but it was less than ideal than what we hoped, since we really wanted to build a website and not a blog site. The other thing was that there is a team of 4 of us who are creating all of this stuff. As a result of COVID and the university's response to moving instruction online, Allison, Hanna, and I were pulled into the Keep Teaching response. So we basically were triaging support requests from instructors who were pivoting to online instruction. This meant we were helping them to get their syllabi and courses set up for the rest of spring semester. So our attention had to shift away from the creation for a portion of spring 20 semester. And then in the background of all of this, the university was migrating to our cloud storage from Box to OneDrive. Trying to figure out where to store materials to share openly on the site became very challenging because of the institution's rollout of OneDrive features being slow to release everything, and it was hard to share links outside of the institution.
As Amanda mentioned, given the challenges that we experienced using the WordPress site and the limitations of that site, as well as some feedback from our communications department when they saw the original version and had some concerns about alliance with our branding guidelines, we did end up creating an entirely new version of the site. Thinking about how we wanted to continue to grow this project in scope, and in conversation with the communications department, they were open to making a space for our site on the library website with a landing page and a series of subpages. We knew that creating this completely revised version basically would mean a lot of additional work on our part and an extended timeline, especially at a time when we had felt that we were coming to the end of the creation phase. But we were also excited for the opportunity to move away from the WordPress format and to get this space on the library website.
We knew the wireframe that we wanted to build, so we needed to filter that content from the blog site into a Drupal version. Building the content for the WordPress site had been a more gradual process, but for the Drupal site, we had to build all of that content up front. The timeline above didn't go exactly as planned, but it established a blueprint for our work the last couple of semesters. We spent the summer writing content for the web pages in Word documents, and then we sent that to our communications team to build into the website. We have the prototype and a couple of screenshots in the next slides, but we are currently in the revising and editing stages before the site officially goes live. Each of us took our area of expertise and wrote 1 to 2 web pages that consisted of original assignments, videos, and content mixed with content curated from other universities.
So this is what the landing page for the site will look like. Though we do hope that in the future we might be able to jazz it up a little bit with an image or something. But our basic goals for the landing page were to welcome everyone to the site, to outline the purpose of the site, so explain who the site was intended for, and then to highlight the specific categories of resources that visitors can expect to find on the site.
While we were curating materials, we strived to keep both accessibility and copyright at the front of our minds. Any materials that we shared needed to comply with the digital accessibility policy and web standards. All of the videos on our site are captioned, and we are working on getting transcripts for those as well. We also wanted to make sure that the copyright and licensing options were clear. Since we included both original content and materials linked from other universities, we wanted to make sure our audiences understood the usage rights. At Ohio State, faculty own the copyright for their artistic, instructional, and scholarly works. In the case of staff, copyright falls under the work made for hire doctrine, so the university owns the copyright for staff. Luckily, Ohio State University Libraries has a Creative Commons license for all of the content on their web pages. So that means that most works appearing on the library's websites that were created by the library's faculty and staff are licensed under a Creative Commons attribution license. This includes handout, instructional materials, LibGuides content, and administrative, procedural, and policy documents. So most works created by staff that appear on the website are available under a CC license. Faculty have the option to use the default CC license or stipulate their own terms for copyright protection. For works not owned or created by the university libraries, users should use their best judgment in making a final determination of copyright status. We also wanted a clear place for people to be able to reach out with questions, comments, or concerns. We have a group email for the teaching and learning department, and that's what we put on the website. We also wanted to use it as a place to advertise and promote the different services that the teaching and learning department has to offer.
We ended up with 5 major categories of resources on the site. And we want to briefly review some of the content on in each of those categories.
At Ohio State, there's a lack of centralized location to find information about affordable educational resources. This information lives in different silos across different units. There's the Affordable Learning Exchange website, several LibGuides, and some random information scattered throughout news stories about past outreach events. My goal was to create a resource for instructors and a place that subject license confidently point to that would walk folks through what affordability looks like at Ohio State. The overarching Affordable Educational Resources page introduces users to what the spectrum of affordability looks like at Ohio State, and then the subcategory pages, as seen in this image, walk them through locating and evaluating resources that they could use in their courses. And then once those are identified, how to teach with them using open pedagogy.
Integrating library resources was a place for us to put ready to share resources, objects that were already created within our system that were able to be essentially plopped into a course. This could be textual guides that could preface a student research assignment, guiding students on how to access databases or evaluate information, or it could be for the instructor themselves on how to find, embed a New York Times article with our personal proxy link using our databases, or something very simple like a basic searching video how-to for one of our most popular undergraduate databases.
On the Teach, Research, and Information Literacy page, we ended up with 6 subcategories, including search tools and strategies, research questions, and types of information sources. On each of these subpages, the resources were then broken down into 3 types of resources. Relevant readings, which were often pages from our open access textbook, Choosing and Using Sources, a guide to academic research. Short videos, keeping the videos that were 3 minutes or so or less. And then we also provided some sample activities and assignments on each of these pages. I should mention here that while a few of the videos that are included on these pages were created at Ohio State, in many cases, we located videos that had been created by other libraries, incorporated those as well. There are just so many great videos out there that other libraries have already created. And we know that we don't have the time to be able to make all of the videos that we wanted to make in all of these categories. So we did pull in videos from other places, but we were careful to provide attribution and to indicate the license for those resources. The activities or assignments that we created were generally created in the libraries, although we do link out to a few activities that were created by other libraries as well.
From my experience working in online education, I wanted to figure out how to share research and information literacy resources that were pre-formatted for our LMS, Canvas. One of the benefits of using Canvas is that these are fully templated, meaning that the instructors can put the resources directly into their course. It also means that instructors can modify them as needed. I use some of the same resources and skills that are shared in the other sections like Jane mentioned, but again, these are pre-formatted to be dropped directly into the LMS. The image on the screen shows a couple of examples, including research support for writing annotated bibliographies, how to use data in research, how to synthesize resources, a guide to using MLA citations, and then a set of skills for locating resources in the health sciences libraries databases. We also wanted to highlight the outreach and programming that the Teaching and Learning Department offers. This programming falls into 2 broad categories: teaching support and professional development. These are again aimed specifically at instructors external to the libraries and range from individual support to synchronous and asynchronous learning opportunities.
And so now you've heard the long story of our process of creating the Instructor Resources site. For this final section, we wanted to provide some recommendations and share some of the things that we've learned along the way. A few of the recommendations that we have in terms of planning and communication. We think it's really important that you consider what you want your site to be, which includes thinking about who the specific audience is and what types of resources you might want to include. As we mentioned, we decided we did not want this to be a site where instructors would go for a deeper dive into pedagogy, information literacy as a concept, but we were thinking of the instructor who is teaching a class and wanted something that they could plop into their Canvas course right away, or that they could show in class with the students and find very quickly and easily. We also recommend thinking really carefully about who your team is and what that team will be, what perspectives and expertise that they can provide. In our group, we have folks who have experience in web design and instructional design and information literacy, online learning, and affordable learning resources. And all of these were very valuable perspectives to include. And of course, like us, many of you will probably not be in the position where you can just create a website on your own, or where you can add things to the library website without getting permission from above. So you will want to think about other stakeholders and partners that you will need to engage with as part of this process. We have outlined many of these questions in a draft planning template that we will share with a link at the end of our presentation.
It's really important when looking at content to understand the structure of pages to determine how to bucket content. It's really easy to overwhelm a digital audience. Don't try to do it all, and be sure to spend that time to plan for what your audience is and the types of content you plan to share and host. You also need to think about accessibility. You may not know who or how many there are, but there are users of your digital services offered by your library, and ensuring your work is accessible from the very start is really the only option here. So the best recommendation we have here is finding out who your web content accessibility guidelines are for your institution. It's the WCAG. And you should have either an accessibility person or a disability person in your institution that will be able to guide to you what your institution personally is utilizing. And for this site, we intended for it to be a living, breathing site, changing as new objects are created. And so the big thing we wanted to make sure was to include a place for the users to contact us. It's a perfect way to open the door for more collaboration with our audience, as well as ensure that if they're asking for something that might be a little more niche, we might have it, but we decided not to put it up there because it's niche. And so making sure we include that two-way communications as part of the site, rather than us just trying to give them all the things.
And finally, we each wanted to share a key takeaway. My takeaway is that if you're going to embark on a project like this, you want to be prepared to be patient and to be adaptable. None of us realized how long this process was going to take. And we, of course, had no idea all of the things that were going to happen in the world that were going to impact this project. And so we had to, as we mentioned, make changes several times. We had to adapt the things that happened, make a completely new pivot as a new opportunity came up. So we really recommend making sure that you're prepared to be flexible and adapt as you move forward with a project like this.
My key takeaway and recommendation would be to use the technology that is available to you through your institution. So in the first iteration of the site, Adobe Spark was a very valuable asset for us to have. It made creating icons really easy because we all had access to the same tool, and we could template them out if we needed to. And so it's worth investigating what tools are available to you at your institution.
Don't reinvent the wheel. Take the time to look into your licensing rights and the licensing of other resources that you may be able to share. Think critically about what makes sense to create yourself or brand specifically for your university or college, and what can be repurposed from other creators.
And last but not least, Don't do this if there's no need. You really need to not skimp on the legwork, the pre-work. This took us nearly 2 years for us to feel like it's complete, and it was time worth spent because we found through our digital object inventory that there were many digital resources being made that had more versatile use, but there was no real way of them being found through our institution by anyone other than the person who created them. So assess your culture, make sure the audience you're aiming for will be ones that are open to using it, and assess what already exists. Maybe you'll find out that it's not time for you to do it. That's okay. That'll be useful information for the future when maybe it is.
The contact information for all of us is available here. If you would like to just send a general email, you can email us at libteach@osu.edu. We have created a folder with presentation materials, including the PowerPoint, the draft planning template, and the draft template for the digital objects inventory. And all of those can be accessed at go.osu.edu/ALAO21OSU.